What's up everyone, it's Cody, back with another tutorial for Kotlin. And last time we were talking about null safety and all of that fun stuff. Today I want to talk about something called control flow. And so with that, let's hop on over to our project window again, click on Kotlin. I'm just going to do Command N on my MacBook. If it's Windows, it's going to be a slightly different hotkey. If you don't know the hotkeys, you can also just do right click and then new Kotlin file or class. So we're going to just call this file control flow and type checks. Create our new file, close out of null safety because we don't need that anymore. We'll minimize that window. I'll zoom in a little bit so it's a little bit easier for everyone to see. And like always, just go ahead and type in main. You'll see it pop up here, hit enter. And so now we can go ahead and run. It'll be a blank screen. And yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. So we'll say print line, just give ourselves a header, control flow, and type checks. We're going to start off with some pretty basic ones. So we'll say print line again, and this is going to be the basic and traditional way. So this is sort of the non-Kotlin way of doing it. So we're going to start off with if-else statements. So the first one is going to be, we'll have val a equals 1, val b equals 2, and we're going to figure out which one is the max number. So there's a couple ways. The first way would be something like this, where I just say var, and then we say max number equals a, and say if a is less than b, max number should equal b. So by default we set it equal to a. If it isn't, we'd set it equal to that, and then I'll just go ahead and say print line and say the max number is max number. We go ahead and run it. We will see that the max number is 2 over here. So that's great, but there's some other ways that we can do it. So I'm going to go ahead and comment this out, and instead of max number equals a, actually I'll just move this up. So on the Mac, it's going to be Option Shift and then the arrow keys. Again, on a non-Mac, it's going to be probably slightly different hotkeys, but I'm just going to move that up, get that out of the way. We're going to say max number. We're going to give it the type of int, and then we're going to say if a is greater than b. We then say max number equals a, else we'll say max number equals b. So we will go ahead and run it again, and you'll see we get the same value. Alright, so there is yet another way in Kotlin that we can actually do this though. So I will go ahead and comment that out, and then on a new line we will say val max number. So instead of a var, we're going to just set it equal to val, so we know the number will never change. And then we just say equals if a is greater than b, then it should be a, else it should be b. We go ahead and run that, and you can see, again, our max number over here is 2. So what is actually happening though? So this is one of the neat things with Kotlin, where when you have any sort of expression, so if else statements and then further statements that we're going to talk about later on in this video, the last value that you have is going to be essentially what is returned. And so if I go ahead and add a curly brace right before the a, hit enter, do the same thing, curly brace before the b, hit enter. If I want to say something like print line, it looks like a will be our max number, smiley face, And then for b, print line, it looks like b will be our max number, and we'll do a sad face. And then if we go ahead and run it, you'll see that this code executes. We have, it looks like b will be our max number, and then the max number is 2, and everything is fine. Now, one thing that I will note is if we move it to here, you'll see that now the IDE is complaining. It's saying, so this expression is unused, and then it's saying down here, conditional branch result of type unit is implicitly cast to any. So what that means is, because for this if statement here, the value that's being returned is an int, but then for this value here, what's actually being returned is that print line, and what the print line is returning. So I'm going to do command and click to look at what it returns, and you'll see it doesn't say anything, but essentially in Kotlin, the default return value is this unit class. And we didn't talk about unit in our types and everything like that, but essentially what it is just something that's void in Java. It's something that has really no meaning to it, but you need to return some value. And so when you look at unit or you see unit, you can just think of it as doesn't really mean a whole lot. There's nothing to it. But so we'll go ahead, change the print line back to what it was, and yeah, go from there. So the next one that I want to talk about is going to be with when statements. And so we will go ahead, give this one a title, say when expressions, and then give us a little bit of space, and we'll say val x is going to be equal to 1, and then we'll say when x, and if we say 1, the next thing is, so it is essentially saying when x is 1, or is equal to 1, we will print line to say x equals 1. If it's 2, we'll do print line x equals 2, else we will say print line x is something else. Go ahead and run it, and then you'll see for our when expressions, x equals 1. So that is one of the ways that we can do a when expression. Another option that we have for when expressions is to say something like print line, to say this is going to be when there's like multiple options in there. And in this case, we'll say when x, and then let's say we only, like if x is 0 or 1, we want a print line to say x is 0 or 1. And then we can just say else, print line, x is something else. So we go ahead, we run that, and we get, because it's equal to 1, we get x is 0 or 1. Alright, so another thing that we can do with when statements is we can look at it in terms of ranges. And so ranges are another special type in Kotlin where we can say when x, and then the way that we define a range is we would say 1, and then period, 10, print line, and we can say x is in the range. And then, oops, we want to say in. And then if we want to have it say within a list, we can say for the list, like list of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. And then over here, just say print line, x is at least a valid number. So even though it may not be in the range we're looking for, which is between 1 and 10. And then we can say not in, 10 to 20, print line, x is way outside of the range. And then because we want to have an else branch just in case, we can say print line, x is none of the above somehow. There's a good chance that there is really no way that it would be, but maybe. So if we go ahead and we run it, we'll get this where it says x is in the range. And essentially the way that this when statement is being evaluated is it will check to see, so when it's 1 to 10, it'll do that, and then it'll immediately finish. So if I go to x and I change this to say, 100, and I run it again, we'll see x is way outside of the range. Same thing, like if I do negative, I believe that'll also give us, way outside of the range. So that's essentially how ranges are working, and also kind of how the when statements are being evaluated, and same thing for any other control flow. So another thing that we can do in Kotlin is casting and smart casting. So this can be done in a variety of different ways, but in this case we're going to use it with the when statement because smart casting really works out well in this case. And so we're going to say when x is a string, we'll just do print line, and we'll say the length of x is going to be x.length. And one thing that I want to note here is length is a property on a string. So it's not a property on an int. We don't have to do anything special though, because we're saying that, if it's a string, it'll do that. And actually, in order for this example to work out, I have to go back up to where x is defined, and instead of just implicitly allowing Kotlin to figure out what the type is, I need to say x will be any, because otherwise it will essentially break, because it knows that x can never be a string in this case. But so in our example though, we'll leave it at that, and then the other one would be, so if it is an int, which in this case that is what type it is, we will say value of x is x, and then else, print line, else, and then arrow, print line to say x is something else. And in order to do the emoji picker, so this is for, again, Mac OS, but I do command control space, and then it gives me a little picker here. I'll select the female shrug emoji, and then just get rid of that extra. Oops. You know what? We'll leave it at that. Never mind. Emojis are not my strong suit. But anyway, we'll go ahead. We'll run this again. We should see value of x is 1. If I go up here though and I change this to be a string, we will see the length of x is 1. If I change this to say 12, it should say length of x is 2, because it's 2 characters in length. Alright, so next up, we're going to do print line to say replacing if else with when. And so the way that I will set this up is we'll say var y equals 2, and then let's say that I want to print this out. If y is odd, we'll print it out to say it's odd. If it's even, we'll say it's even. If it's neither, we'll just say it's funky, because it just is. And so for that case, we'll say if y, and then we'll do modulo division. So 2 does not equal 0. What this is essentially saying is if we divide y by 2 and its remainder is not 0, then we know that it would be an odd number. And that's essentially what modulo division is doing. It's dividing the number and figuring out what the remainder is. So if the number divides into it perfectly, it'll be 0. Otherwise, you'll get the remainder. So in that case, if we do not get a remainder of 0, we can say pretty confidently that y is odd. Else if y modulo 2 equals 0, we can say print line y is even. And then for our last case, just as a catch-all, we will again just say print line y is funky. So we go ahead, we run it. We can come over here to see our replacing if else with when. We get y is even. But then we'll see over here in the IDE that it's highlighting to say cascade if should be replaced with when. And so what I'll go ahead and do, I'll go ahead and copy this, and then I'm going to comment this out just so you have it for a reference, and then I will just do option enter, which brings this up to say replace if with when. Alternatively, we can click over here. So, alright, there we go. So show context actions. I rely on hotkeys a lot, but so I'll do show context actions. So just in case you don't have like an option key to do enter, the other thing you could do is do show context options. I want to say replace if with when, and you'll notice it generates a bunch of code. In this case, we're not passing y into the when statement. We're just saying, yeah, essentially the exact same thing we're doing with our if statement, except instead of having to say if else, we're just saying, this is if, and then if that isn't true, else if, and then else. And so we can go ahead and we can run it again. It does the exact same thing, works the same way. Alright, so next up we're going to talk about our for loops. So this is much more for when you're working with like dynamic content or lists of numbers and things like that. And so with our for loop, we'll start off with a basic one where we'll just say for our variable is going to be I in the range of 1 to 3. We will say print line I. So again, what this is doing is we have a range between 1 to 3, and each time we're going to go through, we're going to give a variable of I equal to whatever the number is at that point in time in the range, and then we're just going to print it out. And so what that looks like is we have a very basic counter where it just says, so we have our for loops and then 1, 2, 3. So that would be kind of the most basic way that you'd use a for loop. But we can also say print line and say fancier for loop. So let's say that you don't want to count in a linear fashion. We could do something like for I in 6. So we're going to start from 6 and we're going to count down to 0. And then we also don't want to count down by 1. We want to count down by 2. And so we can say step 2. And then we'll do print line I. And then when we go to run it, you'll notice it should be 6, 4, 2, and then 0. So that's another way that you can do it if you need to get a little bit fancier with the way that you're doing your for loops. Another option is if you have a collection. So this is, I think, where for loops really start to shine. We're going to say for loops with collections. And for that, we'll just say val my collection, no spaces, and we'll say equals a list of, and then we'll say hey, be sure to like and subscribe. And then I'm gonna try. Hopefully I can do an emoji this time with a smiley face. Alright, the emoji gods have graced me with that one. So now we'll do a for loop where we're going to iterate through this list of collections. So we'll say for, and we'll call this one item in my collection, print line, and we'll just say item. So this is similar to our for loop where I was going to be our variable, but we're going to step through this collection one by one, and each time this will be set to the value of item, and we'll just print it out. So if we go ahead, run it again, we will see our for loop with collections, which says, hey, be sure to like and subscribe, smiley face. Reminder, if you haven't already and you're enjoying this video, be sure to like and subscribe. If you have any questions about anything that you've seen in this video or in previous videos, be sure to comment. Very happy to respond to any questions. But moving along, let's say we want to do something a little bit fancier. We can say print line for loops with collections on indices. So what this is going to do is, let's say we want to print out like the spot in the collection that it was at. We can do that in Kotlin as well. And so the way we would want to do this is we'll say for I in my collection dot indices, and then we can say print line. We'll do I, then a colon, and then we'll do $ parentheses, because I want to say my collection, and then I want to print it out at that point in the list. And so again, we'll go up here, we'll hit run, and then we'll see for loops with collections on indices, so we can see where it is in the list. One thing though that's a little bit ugly is like you have to do this, and so Kotlin has you covered with that as well. So we'll just say for loops with collections for items and indices. And what that looks like is we'll say for, and then we'll add a second set of parentheses, and we'll call this one index, and we'll call this one value, and we'll say in my collection dot with index, and then we can do print line in the same way that we did before. We'll, instead of I though, we'll call this index, and then we'll do colon, and then we will do value, and then we can go ahead and run it again, and you'll see down here, so we have the two, they do the exact same thing, except this one looks a little nicer. Alright, so we're getting into the home stretch. I think my air conditioner just kicked on, so I apologize if you have that in the background. But so we're going to talk about while loops now. So while loops are something that I honestly don't use much anymore with Kotlin, but I do want to go over them just for completeness. Also, if this is the first language you're learning, they're just a good thing to know about. And so for that, we're going to say var number equals, let's say 12, and then we'll say while number is number is greater than 0. We'll say number minus minus. So this is just a way that you can decrement a number. I believe we showed you a way of incrementing numbers, but this will, each time this goes through, this will subtract 1 from the value. And then we'll do print line just to say we're still going to decrement the number dot dot dot. And then if I go ahead and run it, so we get to our while loops, and you'll see that this prints out about 12 times. So that's one option, or one way to do it. We can also use what is called a DoWhile loop. And so the way we do that is just type in do, hit enter, and then in this case I'm going to say val another number equals 0, print line do while dot dot dot, and then I just have to give the while parameter, and we'll say another number is greater than 0. And so you'll notice another number is not greater than 0. And if I go ahead and run it, we will get into our do while, where it just says do while. And the only time that you would really use a do while is if you have something that you want to run at least one time, but could run many times. And so even though that this number is equal to 0, so the while loop immediately exits, we still run this first. But again, I really don't use DoWhiles that often, but just for the sake of completeness. And so, almost in the home stretch with this one, I just want to talk about breaks and continues, because these can come in handy. And in this case, I'm just going to reset our number back to 12. I'm going to say while number is greater than 0, number minus minus. So same thing that we had up here, and then I'm just going to say if number modulo 5 equals 0, so if it is divisible by 5, I want to break out of this loop. And so we'll say print line, we'll say we're still going to decrement the number, ... And if I go ahead and run it, so with our break, we only run it once because we're starting at that. We decrement it first, get there. So initially we're at 11, and then we come back up here, decrement it again. So now we're at 10, divides evenly by 5, and then we break out of the loop. So we don't run it anymore after that. Another option though, let's say you don't want to break out of the loop, but you just want to kind of skip over that part, you can do what is called a continue. And so if we, again, set our number back to 12, and we say while number is greater than 0, and then again, number minus minus, and say if number, this time we're just going to do it for even numbers, so modulo 2 equals 0, continue. So we'll skip over it if that number ends up being even, but otherwise we'll just print line, we're still going to decrement the number, ... Go ahead and run it. So there you go, you can see, our initial while loop had many times that we printed that out. Our DoWhile only printed out once, break only printed out once, and then continue printed out every time the number was odd. And so that is really it for the control flow and type checks. Again, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you have any questions about anything we covered in this video, or would want me to go into more depth about something in a future video, just leave a comment. Otherwise, just to stay up to date with all the videos I'm putting out, be sure to subscribe, and also click the notification bell if you want push notifications. But other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.